Stacie Greco currently serves as the county's Water Resources Program Manager with the Alachua County Environmental Protection Department, where she has worked to protect our water resources for the past 20 years. She has a BS in Environmental Science from Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina, and an MS in Environmental Engineering Sciences from the University of Florida. In 2010, she received a graduate certificate in social marketing from the University of South Florida to learn to apply traditional marketing tools to change behaviors for protecting our water. Stacy serves on the Florida Local Environmental Resources Agency's Board of Directors and is an emeritus board member of the Community Weatherization Coalition. She is also a mentor with the Take Stock in Children Foundation. When not working to protect our water, you can find Stacy exploring it in her kayak or stand-up paddleboard. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It doesn't surprise me at all that when you're not protecting water that you're in it, and I'd love to talk about that later. But in preparation for this interview, I asked a child, where does our water come from? And they looked at me like, that poor adult doesn't know where water comes from, and they simply said, the faucet. Can you expand on that? Where does our water come from?
Yeah, and I'm surprised because I actually find that kids more often know where our water comes from because we're doing that education in the schools, whereas when you and I were in school, we didn't have that type of education. So our water does come from the faucet, but beyond that, it comes from the aquifer beneath our feet. So we have groundwater here, and we're very lucky because it's a fairly clean, abundant source of water. So that water that we use in our businesses, our homes, our yards, it all comes from the aquifer beneath us. But it's the same source of water that our springs and our rivers and our lakes depend upon. So, we really need to be careful on how we use that water if we want to also have those places for me to go explore in my kayak.
So you're saying there's a limit to the water in the aquifer. I have no conception of how big the aquifer is or how much water is there.
It's really challenging for Floridians and our visitors because, anywhere you go, you see water in Florida. So it's hard for us to really feel that scarcity. But what happens is, as we're pulling up too much groundwater, the water table drops, and if it gets beneath a certain level, our springs will stop flowing. So you might recall in 2012, we were in an extreme drought, and Post Springs was just a trickle.
Right. So. And White Springs is another pretty dramatic example of what can happen.
Yeah. So up along the Suwannee River. White Springs used to be a tourist attraction. It was a healing spring that people went to, and there's still water there, but it rarely flows out into the Suwannee River anymore. So, we have this feeling of abundance, but it is a scarce resource.
So what are the biggest things that tap into that water system? Where does the water go? What are the biggest uses?
Our biggest use in Alachua County is called public supply, and that's all the water that we purchase from utilities. So all of us here in Gainesville, GRU, City of Newberry, High Springs, it's all of that water. And if you drill down even deeper, that's mostly residential use. It of course includes restaurants and commercial uses, but it's largely residential. And then if you drill down even further, the largest residential use is actually our yards. So.
We use more water for irrigation than we do to drink or to bathe in? Or?
Absolutely. And it's deceiving because, every time you turn on an irrigation system on average, it's about the same amount of water as taking an 8-hour shower.
Yeah.
So it really adds up quickly.
I don't know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it. Do we have any way of knowing how much water is being used by people who are not on public utilities?
Yeah, so that is a tricky thing. So, agriculture is our second biggest use here in Alachua County. And some of that is metered. Some of it, is estimated based on electric use. Unfortunately, we have these extra straws in the aquifer of landscape irrigation wells. So sometimes if someone is a high water user and they have a high water bill, they'll put in an irrigation well, and we have no idea how much those are using, which makes it very hard if you're trying to balance the checkbook and someone has an ATM card and you have no idea how much they're drawing out.
And there's no regulation stopping that?
Not so for irrigation wells. That is something that I'm really hoping that we might soon see the state restrict. That is not a local government jurisdiction. We would need the state to make some changes so that landscape irrigation wells are not allowed when there's another water source like public supply. Because the key to that, Mark, is one of the biggest tools to get people to use less water is water pricing. So you want, I call it life water. You want that water for washing your dishes, cooking, cleaning to be very affordable for everybody. But then as you use more water, the price gets higher to try to reduce that discretionary use. We don't need to water our lawns to have a happy, healthy life. So what happens, all of our utilities in the county have that rate structure. Some of them are more aggressive than others. If you make that top tier very aggressive and people get this big bill, then they'll just put in an irrigation well. So our best tool is water pricing, and we can't fully use it effectively.
So forgive me for this question being simplistic, but do we have enough water?
That's a hard question for me because we're in this process, how the state looks at that because that's not just a local question, right? That's really looking like regionally. It's called minimum flows and levels, where the state looks at, how much water do we need to have healthy springs and healthy habitat. So they'll look at things like, manatee passage and things like that. And then they also look at, how much water are we currently pumping from the known permits, and how much are we projecting for growth? And the answer is, no, we do not have enough water to sustain our current pumping and to sustain having healthy springs. So we're really at this critical point where we need to figure out how do we reduce our use if we think that having healthy springs is important. And it is important to our economy, and then, also, just for, our well-being.
Can you talk a little bit about the North Florida Regional Water Supply Plan and how that's progressing and what it's showing?
Yeah, so currently the water management district, so we in Alachua County, we live in two, so Suwannee River or St. John's, depending on where you are in the county, are working with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and they're doing this water supply plan. So how much water do we think we need for 20 years down the road? And that draft plan is out now, and it's very concerning to me because projecting almost 100 million gallons a day increase.
Excuse me, a day?
Yes, 100 million gallons per day increase in that public supply use. And to put that in perspective, GRU's permit, so for all of us in Gainesville, that permit is 30 million gallons a day. So it's really, we're going to have more growth, we're going to have more use, so we really need to do better.
And that almost 100 million gallons a day is based on projecting future growth and future uses?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And the prevention and recovery plan, tell me a little bit about that.
So what I'm really hoping happens, so I mentioned the minimum flows and levels, that we know there's not enough water for the lower Santa Fe and the Ichetucknee. That is triggering the state to come up with a prevention and recovery plan. So what do we do about it? And that can include projects that can increase recharge, but it can also include regulatory measures to reduce our water use. So I'm really hoping that when that comes out, and that should come out in 2024, that it has meaningful water conservation measures. Mm-hmm.
I get a little confused sometimes of where the federal government leaves off, the state begins, the counties begin. So, basically, when it comes to approving permits for some new use of water, massive use of water, that happens at the state level, is that correct?
Correct. So the water management districts, they are the one that determine consumptive use permitting, so
right.
CUPs.
Right.
So they go through that process, and it's something that, citizens, residents might pay attention to when there's a controversial permit, like the bottled water plant that has been in the news for the last few years. But, that's happening every month. Every month there's, new permits for consideration, and, there's also renewals. And, what I think is needed is, an overhaul, really looking at that system. So when their staff looks at that permit, they try to determine, is it a beneficial use in the public interest? And I think it's time with, our population growth, climate change, that we need to reevaluate what is the public interest. Is it in the public interest to, allocate enough water for, permanently irrigating landscapes, or do we, shift, what we think is best for all of us and the resource?
Do the water management districts kind of have the ability to affect change in these permits? Are they backed up by regulation that allows them to say no sometimes, or?
So the staff, and I work very closely with the water management districts.
And I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying, I think people are interested in how it works.
Absolutely.
What the steps are.
So they review it, and I think with some of the bigger permits, there's definitely a lot of back and forth with the regulatory agency and the permittee to ratchet it down. Like, do you really need this amount? So someone might come in and start asking for 7 million gallons per day, and at the end they might get 1. It's my understanding from conversations with water management district staff that they don't feel that they have the authority to completely deny a permit, that they need to be finding water for our uses.
Mm-hmm. So tell me just what are some of the things in your expert opinion that maybe could be done with this plan that's coming up to affect change in water usage?
Yeah, so I already mentioned that irrigation wells undermine our water pricing tool. So I'd love to see a prohibition on new landscape irrigation wells when there's another source available. Mm-hmm. Again, looking at that public interest, how do we do the consumptive use permitting? Also, landscape irrigation, that's a big one. So people have probably seen our messaging about the restrictions. They just changed to 1 day a week. As a local government, we're not allowed to have stricter restrictions than the water management district here in Alachua County. We've done calculations that we think we could reduce use by up to 50% if we went to 1 day a week year round. Mm-hmm. So that's something we'd like to see, is just having local governments have more tools where we can help reduce use.
Now, also, when it comes to the agricultural uses, that's pretty much preempted to the state of Florida, isn't it?
Correct. So ag, is definitely a big use, and especially when you're looking at the Santa Fe Basin, agriculture is one of the biggest uses. But with the Right to Farm Act, local governments, we don't really have a regulatory tool to influence agriculture. So hopefully we'll see in that plan, the prevention and recovery plan, that we will see measures in there that improve best management practices for agriculture and try to reduce use from that sector also. So great question.
Before I leave the permitting, the consumptive use permits, is there an avenue for the public to be involved in this if someone is particularly interested?
Yeah, so you can always send public comments. Those things are determined mostly at the Water Management District Board meetings, so you can send comments through their portal or show up to their meetings. I think also, reaching out to our legislature and the governor. So really the governor appoints the governing board members of our water management districts. So that's a very important board that ultimately makes the decisions.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about Alachua County specifically. I see the incredible tools and materials that you all produce to educate on irrigation, but tell me a little bit, like, for example, about irrigation design standards? I know you work closely with the folks in the field that install these things. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a lot of our programming really does focus on that landscape irrigation because we know it's like 60% of the water budget of most houses. So if we can reduce that, we save people money also. It's incredible. We work with the University of Florida and we have access to a lot of water use data. And they recently published a paper that shows that newer construction, that homes use closer to 400 gallons of water per day. Whereas if you look at older construction and in the same time period, those homes are using closer to 150 gallons per day.
Because of irrigation?
Correct. So
Okay.
if you follow it, there's a direct correlation that in about 1995, automatic in-ground irrigation systems became the norm with new construction. And as we see more of those systems go in, we see that water use really skyrocket. So really what we're trying to do, and our irrigation design code is our best tool for that, and we just amended that. So now any new landscape irrigation system, again, this is yards, not agriculture,
Right.
It can only be irrigating 50% of the permeable area, so 50% of the yard, which means that half of it is not going to have permanent irrigation. So you might need to use a temporary irrigation system to get things established, like an old hose and sprinkler. And we really need to start making very smart choices about what plants we use, because we want things that once they're established
Right.
to just be able to thrive on our rainfall alone.
So I guess the whole idea of irrigation is the St. Augustine grass model, where you have a green carpet that surrounds your house. So with this 50% area, I mean, what you're saying in effect is we'd like you to find 50% of your space and do other things with it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we need to use different plants. I mean, in St. Augustine, it does fine in some places without irrigation, but you need to have the right soil, the right conditions. So
Right.
really the key is the right plant for the right place. And, we have a lot of options there. So we're really trying to, I would say, Mark, the goal of my work here at the county, we're really trying to shift our landscaping paradigm. That if I tell you, shut your eyes, picture the yard of the week, we've been programmed to think about, that bright green monoculture carpet. But really what we need is we now need yards that, have multiple species in them, might have some plants in it that we used to call weeds, but really we're learning they're great pollinator plants. We know that our pollinators are in trouble, have butterflies, leaving your leaves at the bottom of your trees. We know that, that leaf litter is really important for caterpillars. So if you want butterflies next year, you need some habitat for those caterpillars now. So we're really trying to shift that landscaping paradigm that, our yards can actually be habitat.
Do we have resources that people can go to get some help with this?
Yeah, so we do a lot of education. Really what I'm talking about, is Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, which the state created, and our extension office does a great job at educating the public there. We are trying to push the envelope a little bit further in that, if that plant needs, constant fertilizer, needs that permanent irrigation, that it's no longer the right plant for the right place, that it's not Springs friendly if it really needs that input.
I've been listening to you for years on this subject, and when I bought my house in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
I walked out and I took a look at my yard and I just said, good luck to you. And there was irrigation. I had it removed. There was some small irrigation. Mm-hmm. And I've got trees and bushes. And what is amazing is I have ground cover, but if you get down on your hands and knees and look closely at it, in just an area this size, I'll find like 10 different things. And I have to mow it, but it worked itself out, mm-hmm. and the whole yard does fine. What survived. What didn't. And I didn't try to take extraordinary life-saving measures with what didn't survive.
Yeah, and that's a great approach. So, if anyone's listening to this and, you have a yard that you're regularly irrigating, I would say, start ratcheting back so that you start to train your roots to go deeper for their water. It doesn't always have to be this drastic change, right, of ripping it all up and spending a bunch of money, although sometimes we've got rebate programs for that, but it can be more subtle. Slowly turn off that irrigation, see what happens. The best landscape is one that we let mature and change with conditions. I mean, we've got a lot of neighborhoods that now have this mature tree canopy, which is great for shade, and it reduces your utility bills, carbon, all of these reasons. But what happens is, if you're then trying to have a turf under it that really needs a lot of sunlight, you're going to be this constant battle. It's not going to do well. So, letting it transition to something else, or, putting in some type of landscaping that can take that shade. And we have a Florida-friendly landscaping code for homeowners associations to help people that are trying to make changes in their landscape but are encountering some resistance from their HOA. So reach out to our staff. We're happy to help.
So, Stacie, didn't the state of Florida at one point institute some Florida-friendly landscaping regulations that made it easier for people to institute it without their HOA denying it?
Yeah, in 2009, there was a statute that came out, and we were very excited about it. Unfortunately, it did not have any enforcement capabilities. So what was happening in those instances, people were having to then take it to the court system, which is a huge barrier if you want to make changes in your landscapes.
I want a bush, I have to go to court.
Correct. So what we did in 2015, we adopted very similar language here in Alachua County, and we gave us the authority. And it says that a homeowners association cannot prohibit a homeowner from installing Florida friendly. It does not void the covenants for the neighborhood. You still have to follow the practices, a lot of them have architectural review boards, so you still need to do that. But if your HOA is not allowing you to have a Florida friendly option, then that's in violation of our code, and we can help. And we start with education, and our extension office, again, is a wonderful partner with that. And so far, we've had, I think, about 8 cases, and we've been able to solve them, just with education and site visits, and, find a solution that worked for everybody.
Let's talk a little bit now about fertilizer.
Okay.
The time is going by so fast. Tell me about where we are in terms of fertilizer use in Alachua County.
Yeah, so our highly maintained landscapes, they're a double whammy, right? If you're irrigating them, it's depleting our groundwater, and a lot of times to maintain that look, they're being fertilized. And what can happen, fertilizer has nutrients in it, which is great for making grass grow, but it's also great for making algae grow if that fertilizer gets, pushed through the ground, past the roots and into our groundwater, or if it, washes off into our surface waters. So, like with most of our programs, we have a 2-pronged approach, a lot of education. You've probably seen our billboards, our social media, where, we're really encouraging people, just not fertilize, let's see how our landscapes change, or just fertilize very minimally. But then we also have a fertilizer ordinance.
Yeah, tell me about that. What are the restrictions?
Yeah, so you can't use fertilizer that has nitrogen in it for most of the year. You're allowed to use it in March, April, May, and June. So that's in the spring when your plants are really starting to grow. We don't want people using it in the summer because that rain washes it off. Right, you're wasting money down the storm drain. And then in the winter, it gets colder here in North Florida, and our plants basically go to sleep. They're dormant, so they don't need fertilizer. So, if you put it down, the roots aren't sucking it up, and, it's just going to get into our groundwater or wash off into our storm drains. So, is it set up so that I can only buy fertilizer in the stores when I'm allowed to use it? I wish, Mark.
Yeah.
So we do have in our ordinance signage requirement. So if you go into any store that sells fertilizer, you should see our nice sign there. If not, let me know. But unfortunately, we cannot do a sales ban. Pinellas County did, and after they did that, a preemption was put in place that other local governments could not ban the sale of fertilizer during those months. Which is challenging because in Hillsborough County, near Pinellas, in the Tampa Bay area, they're seeing great water quality improvements. So, that is one tool I'd love to have back in our local government toolbox.
So they haven't preempted us from doing this, but they've preempted us from requiring stores to cooperate on when they sell it. That's interesting.
Correct. So it is challenging, and I understand, the industry, it's challenging for them because it's much easier for us to enforce that with a professional that's spreading fertilizer. Right. Whereas homeowners, I'm not hiding in garages on Saturday mornings looking to see what people are doing. So, it does make it a little bit more challenging for the industry, and I hear that.
And so important, though, to educate those homeowners that you're not really doing your yard any good by spreading fertilizer in the winter.
Yeah. And we've done a lot of education. We had a grant from the state where we were able to create wonderful materials. So, we do billboards, we use social media, and we do a lot of survey work. And we actually hired an engineering firm that took our results and put it in a model. And it looks like we are reducing fertilizer use by something like 8,000 pounds a year. And it only is costing us like $1 to $2 a pound. Whereas if we do an engineering project where we're then trying to clean up polluted water, we're looking at $200 to $500 per pound. So it's really valuable to do that education and try to keep the pollutants from even making it to our waterways.
In our last minute, what would you like to communicate just about landscapes in general and all the things we've been talking about?
Yeah, so our landscapes, why we've spent so much time on it, it's just, because that's one place where we can make huge differences. So, the first is reducing water use. So turning off that irrigation system, it could mean just ratcheting it down. If you can do an irrigation tune-up, irrigation systems are like our cars. You bring your car in for an oil change. Yeah. If you are using it, there's rules that you need to be maintaining it and checking it annually, and then fix those things. Run it in the daytime. You would be shocked by how many leaks. We find leaks all the time. Allowing your landscape to mature as your tree canopy matures. Maybe looking at plants a little bit different. A weed is a plant out of place. So that's our subjective definition. So, maybe look at plants. If you see some pollinators there, then let it stay. And, of course, reducing that fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide use.
Well, Stacie, thank you for taking care of our environment and our water, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, next time let's do it on a kayak.
You got it.
Is it okay to call you Mom?
Of course you can.